Okay, we're back. This time with two guests. Scott, I will not even introduce. Scott, everybody knows Scott already, by now. So, Jon, introduce yourself.
Hey.
Let people know who you are.
I am Jon Shanks. I'm one of the co-founders of a company called Appia, which way we kind of help people build and innovate in the cloud. Little bootstrapped company in London. Used Kubernetes when it first got released before the company started. And that was the inspiration to create the company. So yeah, we do. So pleased to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for helping us out. Okay, so everybody knows the drill. Hopefully, if you're the first time here, let's do the drill, right? If you never attended this stream, the thing you should know is that there is no script. We did not prepare anything. We don't have talking points. You just ask anything you want, and we'll do our best to answer. And it's perfectly valid for us to say we have no idea what you're asking. Anyways, where are we? Okay, here's a question. The first one from Bernd, and this is specifically for Scott. When is the Neon DB Crossplane provider coming? Have been waiting for it since you mentioned it. Also, any new guides, tutorial for the Crossplane backstage integration, new features? I think that Scott might be having.
This one. Yeah, I'll take this one. So the Crossplane provider for Neon, before releasing it, I realized that there are some issues in their Terraform provider that were causing some issues. I'm working on that right now and hope. And regarding the Crossplane backstage integrations, there are currently no new features on the Crossplane side. Although we have added a bunch of new features to the Kubernetes ingester plugin to also be able to create software templates in Backstage from any Kubernetes CRD that you want. That you can either do label selections or just give the full GVK of the different resources, and then we auto-generate from them, as well as just like the Crossplane resources plugin, there's now a Kubernetes resources plugin that works off of owner references. So it's expanding beyond just Kubernetes, beyond just Crossplane. It doesn't work with Crow because Crow has decided not to use standard Kubernetes practices of owner references. But when it comes to the 21st century and decides to use standards, then it'll work with Crow as well.
Very cool. I'm gonna jump ahead just slightly. This is from Ari. Heads up that Scott coming in a bit choppy. I think that Scott is downloading something from torrent or something like that. He's doing, and he forgot that that's what.
I'm on my home network, unfortunately, not working from home, not working from the office today. So I apologize for the bad internet connection.
That's okay. We do what we can. Okay, so from Tyrion, what's your go-to strategy for debugging networking issues inside Kubernetes, especially when dealing with service-to-service TLS? Who wants to take it?
Oh, it's been some time since I've done that. I guess, isn't there support for this in just runtime containers? Bootstrap a little container, debug it inside of there, NetShoot, or similar.
Yeah, you can also go with. Yeah. Remind me, Scott, what's the eBPF debugging one that you like a lot?
Right, so there's Inspector Gadget, which is great.
Yes.
If you're using Cilium as the CNI, then definitely look at Hubble, because Hubble is the best UI. If you're using Cilium, it only works with Cilium though. If you're using Antria, then use the Antria UI, which is a nice React project that gives you some visibility. Calico has their own as well, but Cilium's is by far the best in that level. And Inspector Gadget as a general eBPF tool is amazing for debugging, if needed. But yeah, Nikolaka NetShoot is the de facto standard of containers for testing anything networking. I've yet to meet a networking tool that doesn't exist in NetShoot. So it's just great.
Oh. Do you think Jenkins is
Yes.
dead?
Yes.
No, it's not dead.
Yes.
Okay,
Well, sorry, that was my wishes. I wish it was dead. It is not dead.
Let me give you a better word for it, or words. I think it's on life support. Meaning it will not be dead for decades to come. COBOL is not dead. Right? So, life support. I think that's the word.
I didn't think people
I
were still
wish
using
were
it.
Dead. It's not dead.
Yeah.
50% of the industry is still using it.
Is that how high it is? 50% are still using Jenkins. Wow.
That would be my guess. I mean, like we see it everywhere. It's like all these large enterprises. Think about the challenge of moving. Like I have a customer that I was dealing with a few weeks ago that has over 35,000 pipelines in Jenkins.
God. What a
Good luck
depressing
building that.
stat.
Yeah, I'm not sure that... I don't know the stats, but if I would have to place the bet, I would say yes, 50%. Not 50% of the companies, but 50% of, let's say, pipelines, right? Because vast majority of pipelines are owned by big companies, right?
Yeah.
Enterprises. It will never go away.
Right. I'd say that 50% of companies are using GitHub Actions, but a lot of those companies are small companies that have 3 or 4 pipelines versus you go to Jenkins where they have a typical company has hundreds of pipelines.
Yeah. And I guess if it's not fully broken, there's no need to move away from
No.
it.
No, there is a need. It's broken. It's just that it's very, very expensive.
So yeah, to move.
What significant number of Jenkins users did not create scripts and then use Jenkins to orchestrate the execution of those scripts. Because if that's what they did, moving from one place to another would be relatively easy, right?
Yeah.
Significant number of companies have huge Jenkins pipelines written, what was it, Groovy, right?
Yeah, Groovy,
that is just hundreds and thousands and tens of thousands of lines of Groovy that you cannot just move somewhere. You literally need to... So you have, let's say, 10 years of investment that you need to reinvest.
Yeah.
It's extremely expensive.
But then you don't get to... no one upgrades Jenkins. So whatever Jenkins version people are on, that's it. You're stuck on that, aren't you, really? Or it breaks. All the plugins break, and you remember all that.
Who upgrades versions of Ubuntu?
Exactly.
Who upgrades a version? Right? Let's be honest. No one upgrades anything except Kubernetes because every requires the new.
To be fair, vast majority of companies updated Jenkins like a year or 2 years ago when there was that Log4j madness.
Oh yeah.
So at the next update cycle will be when we discover next big security threat that will eventually prove not to be a big threat, but everybody freaks out, and then they go and say, we should update, and then they don't update to the latest, but they update to the next one, which is still 7 years old instead of 8, right?
They update to the latest patch version that solves the severe and don't upgrade to the latest major version. Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, now this is a question that I don't understand. So I don't know if either of you understand. And the question is, any tools to update Kubernetes version with ease, currently using EKS, and I had to cordon every node, update with Terraform, then drain the nodes for 50 nodes. The reason why I don't understand is that unless I'm terribly wrong, isn't EKS itself doing rolling updates and doing the cordoning and all that stuff?
It can do, yeah. If it's the fully managed bit. If you go full in, not your own AMIs.
It depends which type of node pool.
Yeah.
Right? It depends which node pool you're using. If you're using a user managed or system or a managed node pool.
Yeah. But I thought they were coming out with a service, a central upgrade service that will basically kind of do multi Kubernetes even upgrades as like a central hub, like a hub spoke model thing for all the Kubernetes. I think they're I think Azure's doing that as well. They've got some beta thing. And I think Amazon were doing the same, coming out with something.
Azure had that for like 2 years already with Azure Fleet, which is
That's
amazing.
it, Azure Fleet, yeah.
So the answer to this question, do I understand it?
AWS,
Go for it.
In AWS, use either managed node pools, right? Option 1, use managed node pools, or if you really want to like suffer for the rest of your life and eternity, use Fargate node pools. But I would just say use managed node pools, or use a like industry standard like Cluster API to manage your clusters instead of a imperative tool like Terraform, and then things are much easier to manage, and it will manage the lifecycle and rollouts.
But here's the part I don't get: is why would anybody not use if you're using EKS? Why not use managed node pool?
Because managed node pools are newer than user managed node pools, and therefore a lot of people who have clusters that have been upgraded over time still have user managed node pools.
Okay, that
There's
makes sense.
zero reason not to use a managed node pool, in my opinion, today when creating an EKS cluster. The pure question is, do you have... I mean, there's a bit more flexibility when you do a user managed node pool than there is with a managed node pool, although I don't believe that flexibility actually matters because you can create 35,000 node pools, who cares? So just create a few more node pools that are managed that, you know, fit your needs, and just configure Autoscaler to work with that, or Carpenter even better. But like, really, it's mostly a legacy thing, I think.
Yeah, I think also, wasn't it for people that used to bake images, you know, have their own images, their own AMIs as a company, and they'd have like golden images, and they weren't allowed to use the official AMIs, you know, of the managed node pools that Amazon obviously would support. And so there was a bit of a traditional meets managed service approach, and that's when people went into user managed.
Okay, let me see the next one.
Which again, I think is such a legacy. Which I think is such a legacy concern.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
Yeah, but you know, I mean, when I asked earlier, why would anybody not use managed? What I really meant, I mean, I understand that, yeah, before we got managed, we did not have managed, and that makes perfect sense. But if you're asking this question, there is a pain, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if you haven't experienced the pain, and then I understand you stay where you are, but you experience the pain, wouldn't it make more sense to actually take the pill and switch to the managed cluster instead of having recurring issue, right? Because you're legacy, kind of. I understand having legacy and saying, this works, I'm not touching it.
I think the issue is, and we deal with this in a lot of like enterprises, that, you know, like the infra team are like, we need to use our custom image. Like it's, you know, it has our security hardening or whatnot. And they don't just treat a Kubernetes node as a black box. And that's what a Kubernetes node is. Because in the end, everything that's running is within the container, and you should be using a slimmed down Kubernetes distro. Use Amazon Linux too. Use, you know, Photon OS. Use, you can optimize operations on Google. Use whatever Azure's is. I forgot the name. But use a minimized OS that has minimal vulnerabilities and have the things in the containers. And you should be viewing a Kubernetes node as a black box that is completely ephemeral. The issue is that still, like, most industry, like, the standards like PCI compliance and all these compliances still don't understand what Kubernetes is. So they still talk about segmentation between web app and DB. Good luck doing that in Kubernetes. Like, have a nice day. Right? It's a flat network for pods. You need to have these agents running on your nodes. What do you mean? I have runtime protection with Aqua, Prisma, whatever tool you're using for runtime protection. I have a tool doing that. Like, what do you mean I need to have an agent on my node? But some of these legacy companies that don't know how to push back on PCI and say, I implement this, it's just done differently in Kubernetes, are stuck with these, you know, horrifying decisions of custom AMIs, and now they need to manage it, and that's the pain. So either learn how to push against your compliance agencies and teach them they're wrong. And I can tell you there are dozens of PCI compliant agencies companies that use the Amazon images or suffer. It's your choice.
In my experience, whenever I see some compliance rule in a company, typically you if you just ask that person when was that rule created, and if you know the year, you know how that rule is implemented, because it was defined how you need to do it at that same day and never changed since then.
Yeah, a lot of it's security teams.
1953.
Okay, from Stay 9292, I have finished learning DevOps course on Jenkins, Ansible, GitOps, Docker, Kubernetes, and Terraform. Please let me know from where can I find test projects with source code. I don't know. I know that I
Yeah, GitHub.
Google. What I do know is that I don't like that approach to learning. If it was me, I would pick one of those, learn Jenkins, and then start using it for real, instead of moving immediately to learn something else. When I say learn, I mean learn without doing, right? Okay, so there we go. Answer is GitHub. Good idea. On the issue of torrenting, any thought on Kraken? I don't know what's Kraken. Any of you knows what is Kraken?
No, not heard of Kraken.
Okay. Tyrion says that I'm 100% louder than the rest. I changed the volume of Jon. I don't know whether that helped. Let us know in the comments, and then we'll figure out something else. What is the opinion on cargo now after 1.4 release? I haven't checked it. And I know that Scott haven't checked it without even asking him, because he doesn't use Argo CD. So it's either you, John, or nobody knows.
Yeah, no, I don't know either. Not a clue on the new release.
Well, no idea. Why can't companies spin up their self-hosted GitLab server?
I don't.
Oh, Scott, I think now you're like 2 minutes delayed. Let me type him a message.
Or he's in the future.
Or he's in the future. Delayed. Okay. Why cannot companies spin up their self-hosted GitLab server? It's open source, even include artifact repository and CI/CD built-in for use. From where did GitHub got the edge upon it? I don't have the data. I can just have my wild guess is that
Why?
Huh?
The SAS is. I just use the SAS.
Yeah, kind of. Why would I run it? That's the question I have. The only reason why I would consider running something myself, and it would be if the price is simply out of my reach. Kind of, this is not worth, right? But if the price is right, the more I let somebody else run something, the more I can focus on things that really matter. Because my business is not to run Git. It's not my business.
Yeah, I agree with that. And you get loads of free things anyway, don't you, normally, especially if it's open source. So if you've got an open source project, but I know with GitHub that's true. So I would have assumed they'd be reasonably competitive in GitLab. So I don't know why you would want to run GitLab. But as a project, maybe, just to run something, play around.
Yeah, I mean, there are companies that have rules that prevent them from using SAS, which I think is silly. I think that those companies are at the great disadvantage in general. It's not only about GitLab, but hey, use SAS. Tell the right dude to talk closer to the mic. I think that right dude is completely messed up with the internet now. I don't think it matters. Uber made Kraken a peer-to-peer Docker registry. Any thoughts? I haven't used it. I know that
Yeah.
John neither.
No. Sorry.
Okay, so this is gonna be polarizing. Actually, it's not because Scott is not online now. He's lost. Do you think CAPI is the best way to be provisioning, upgrading, and operating cluster? If yes, are there free paid permanent tools that are out there that based followed CAPI concept? I personally don't think that CAPI is the best way to run clusters, except if they are self-managed on-prem.
Yeah.
I like Crossplane.
Yeah.
I'm opinionated, so John, I don't know how you see it.
I would have said the same. Yeah. If it's like if you're doing on-prem and it's traditional IT, I guess makes sense. But I think for cloud, I like obviously wouldn't make sense, especially for managed services as well. But yeah.
The only actually the case where I think that CAPI makes more sense than Crossplane, if you have no opinions, you don't need any flexibility. Kind of, hey, spin up an EKS cluster, and I don't want to know about it. Kind of like, I don't want to make decisions about subnets and VPCs and stuff like that. That maybe. Let's see. If you use node groups, the process can be done by API UI, right? And it's very simple.
I didn't actually upgrade EKS. Coordinate answer. I think someone was answering the.
Yeah, I mean, I always used managed node groups because I'm not an early user of EKS. I think that EKS early on was horrible. I preferred COPS, and then I jumped straight into managed node groups. I have no idea. Okay, say something, Scott. Let's see whether you're with us now.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes. Yeah.
Yes.
Better.
In the face. Move the phone. There we go. From Steven, should you have an interactive shell enabled for pods in a production environment? No. Zero.
Yeah.
Never.
Ever. Yeah.
Actually, I would say it was always never. Now it is even more than never, because not only that was always a bad practice, but now you have even the ability to attach debug containers into pod.
Pods, yeah.
If you need to enter and debug something, which you shouldn't be doing, but if you have to, you can attach a separate container into the pod. That container has a shell. You do whatever you need to do. It's called debug containers. There is zero reasons why you would do that.
Exactly.
Okay. Wait. Actually, I'm gonna go back one question here because Scott, this is Scott's. You haven't heard our answer, so you don't know what we said, Scott. But what do you think the CAPI is the best way to provisioning, upgrading, and operating the cluster? There you go.
CAPI is by far the best way to manage clusters. CAPI today can manage EKS, AKS, and GKE beyond just self-managed, making it by far the best option. I think that the only question comes to, should you be doing like a kubeadm based cluster in AWS versus an EKS cluster? And that can be a debate of which control plane provider you use, if it's EKS or KCP. And that really depends on your use cases. Typically, I would say it's always going to be the managed solution of the cloud, unless money is a concern in EKS. That's number one, because with and your cloud compliances, and you need audit logs, because with KCP I can send that to an S3 bucket and don't need to go through CloudTrail and whatnot and spend millions of dollars on just audit logs. I can in KCP set what I want audited, what I need by my compliance, and just set it to S3 much cheaper. Right, so those are like use cases where you wouldn't want EKS. But typically, I would say use EKS, AKS, GKE, and always manage it through CAPI. I see zero use case not to manage through CAPI. I think that CAPI should be managed through Crossplane. So it should actually be two levels of abstraction. Crossplane that creates CAPI plus some additional resources, and then CAPI provisions the cluster using something like EKS, AKS, GKE, or KCP if you're on vSphere, Nutanix, bare metal, whatever esoteric solution you're using.
But would you say you'd only use it if you were like multi-cloud or a mix? If you're in one cloud and it's just EKS, wouldn't you just go native EKS?
No.
Or EKS ETL? You wouldn't. You'd choose CAPI for it.
I would always choose CAPI for it for the declarative nature of management. And also for one very simple reason. Every customer that has ever told me that we're single cloud,
yeah,
I always tell them, talk to me in 3 years. If they start on CAPI today, then when they get the better deal from the other cloud in a year and want to move, they don't need to change all of their tooling. When they also need to do on-prem at some point, if they do, and there's cloud repatriation, that will also work better. Meaning no matter what, it is a very low overhead for a very high benefit.
Yeah, so you're basically future-proofing, flexibility and future-proofing.
And just following the industry standard of CAPI, right?
Yeah.
Like, finally, we have an industry standard. It's like, let's use it. It's like, if it was use EKS or use CAPI, because you could only do, let's say, kubeadm with CAPI, I would say, no, use EKS. But because I can do EKS with CAPI, I don't see any reason not to wrap it in CAPI. Why would I use Terraform or EKS CTL over CAPI? I'd rather use CAPI.
Cool.
Okay, from Anthony. By the way, I lowered my mic due to the comments I've seen. Let me know whether now it's better compared to others. Any good resource for disaster recovery with the Crossplane cluster using compositions? Looking to understand better the steps, scaling down provider, disabling GitHub's backup restore. I don't have a resource as in a link. The process is relatively straightforward. You create a new cluster, you install Crossplane, you restore the backup of Crossplane resources, and then you enable GitOps to keep it up to date. That's the gist of it.
Exactly. There's a article on the Crossplane blog that AWS did on how to do it with Valero. I believe it's on the Crossplane blog, or it's linked from Crossplane, and it's on the AWS blog. It's on one of those blogs. But if you type Crossplane AWS Valero in Google, you'll find it. And it's a good documentation on how to do it with an open source tool like Valero.
Did any of you guys use Mise? I haven't heard of it even, so.
No, never heard of it in my life.
Never heard of it, no.
Sorry, Ezekiel, no answer here. Testing Keda recently, in one of your videos, you talk about Knative, which queues requests until it wakes up. I believe that Keda now does the queuing as well, so I'm not even sure whether we need Knative anymore. I don't know. What's your take, guys?
I think we've been using Keda for a while. Knative was very complicated.
It's horrible.
And very bloated, really. But yeah, I'm not sure. I've not followed it to so I don't know if Scott knows more.
Yeah, so there's still some benefits to Knative. And it really comes to what the level of abstraction you want for your users is. Knative, one of the nice things is someone creates a Knative service and automatically they get an ingress. They don't need to know what the ingress domain is. They don't need to care like any of these things. It just happens automatically. All of that you could implement with Crow, Crossplane, any type of, composition tool. And then Keda is a much better scaler than anything that exists in Knative. Knative, when you have a jack of all trades like Knative is, it is not a master of any trades. It has a adequate solution for all trades, though. Meaning if you're looking for, I believe that Knative is still much simpler to manage than a separate ingress controller, a separate, Crossplane to create your composition, to make things easier, to have a tool for, config management, to have a tool for like Argo rollout style, to have a tool for auto scaling. It's much easier than managing all of that. However, it is not as good as any of those tools when you're building something yourself. So if you're building your own abstractions already, don't use Knative. If Knative is a good enough abstraction for you, then use Knative and just use that as your abstraction, but never use it as a building block.
I would actually extend your description to, if you have a third-party abstraction of any kind that is just what you need, don't build your own. That applies to anything.
Exactly.
If you can use, if Vercel is doing what you need it to do, don't do anything else. Use Vercel.
Right.
I mean, I'm using it as example, but any abstraction.
Right. The other thing that I will say on that, though, is that Keda does have that queuing mechanism. As far as I know, it's still in alpha, and it's the HTTP-based scaler, and it's still alpha, from what I know, unless something has changed recently since I've been following it that I missed. But as far as I know, it's still alpha and still was kind of buggy over Knatives, and Knatives is not buggy at all. The scale to 0 with queuing. So non-scale from 0, Keda has always been great. Scale to 0, there have been many issues previously.
The slight problem I had with Knative, and this might be because of my mental capacity, I completely agree with everything you said, except that I feel that I had more difficulty debugging issues with Keda than if I assembled resources myself. Kind of, when it goes sideways, I had problems kind of to understand what the heck did you do? Kind of like, what the heck is going on here, right?
You create a service which creates a configuration which is tied to multiple revisions, which have then a deployment, which have replica, which have a single. Yeah, it's challenging.
So here's my main complaint, and you will probably find it to be silly. And this might not be the case anymore because I haven't used it in a while, is that I like using kubectl 3 plugin. And I would say, okay, find me all the resources created from Knative. And it doesn't really maintain the tree of everything. It kind of, you need to know exactly what are all the pieces, all the components. You cannot find it out that easily. At least that was in the past, right? If kubectl 3 doesn't work, I freak out.
It has owner references, but they are kind of like more sibling references. So it has like the parent is the service, but then there are multiple childs under that, even though they affect one another. So they should be like multi-tiered, and it's only 2-tier. There are challenges, and they don't, I think, get owner references 100% correct. Yeah, that is a challenge in Knative.
Okay, from Suzzle. What does Crossplane bring to the table? And I believe that this might be related to CAPI, maybe. I'm guessing, Suzzle, let us know in the comments. I think that was related to Scott's comment about, hey, wrap CAPI into Crossplane. So I will let him answer it because he said it. And I might, if I misunderstood the question, Suzzle, just let us know.
Yeah. So the main benefit that it brings us is that CAPI is great at managing infrastructure, but it doesn't manage really anything else on our clusters. And the truth of the matter is that a Kubernetes cluster is not Kubernetes. A Kubernetes cluster or a functional Kubernetes cluster is a Kubernetes cluster plus a CNI, plus a CSI, plus 20,000 other add-ons that we need in the cluster in order to start deploying a Hello World application on it. And that's where Crossplane comes in. We can create a composition with exactly the inputs that I care about showing to my end user via an XRD. And if you're still on Crossplane V1, you use a claim. Otherwise, just use the composite resource in Crossplane V2, which is so much better. but you just create your own abstraction, and that will create a cluster using CAPI, connect to that cluster, deploy Argo CD or Flux CD, hopefully Flux CD because we believe in technology, and from there it will go and deploy via GitOps all of the things that we need in our cluster to make things work. So it's a clean way to provide an abstraction of what a cluster means to you, versus CAPI, which is a great way to create the infrastructure of a Kubernetes cluster, which simply is not enough. It's a great starting point.
Nice. I have to jump, guys. I've got to travel, but it's been a pleasure.
Thank you for being with us.
Thank you. Thank you.
Cheers, John.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Okay, next one. Oh, no, sorry, I skipped one. Tim Cates, K9S, or Canins, or whatever is pronounced, or Lens, or something else. I don't use Lens, so I do use K9S, so I'm team K9S. I don't know about Scott. Probably
I'm
neither.
Team Cube Cuddle. I don't use Lens or K9S.
I tried to be nice. I didn't want to exclude either of them. I'm also Cube Control. When I said that I use K9S, I open it once a month. It's kind of nice.
Yeah.
Then you close it.
I have installed K9S. I have uninstalled it about 2 days later. I have installed Lens. I have uninstalled it about 2 days later. Neither brought enough value.
Let's put it this way. If you would have to use one of those two, which one would you go with?
If I was, for myself as an experienced person in Kubernetes, I would say K9s. For someone who is less experienced in Kubernetes, I would say use Lens.
I agree. Okay. Do you know any good best practice for monorepo apps versioning? Again, this will have to be you. Because I really dislike monorepos.
Yeah, I was going to say, don't do it. Away from monorepo.
I feel that whenever I hear the reasons for monorepo, all those reasons in my head are translated to bad practices. Kind of like you're using monorepo so that you can continue doing things that you shouldn't be doing. That's how I interpret it.
Yeah.
Okay, configuring setup for monitoring endpoints with Prometheus black box and alert manager is extremely bolding activity. Agree. Uptime Kuma solves things good, but not flexible. What is your go-to weapon to solve? I mean, I'm an open source guy. I prefer Prometheus, and I suffer. Prometheus, Grafana, alert manager. If I want to go crazy, I would replace Alert Manager with something else, but Prometheus is definitely there. But I like suffering. I like open source. Scott.
For me, it's mostly, first of all, you have to have Prometheus, Grafana, Alert Manager in your stack. Beyond that, what is I'm forgetting the name. I love
Robusta.
it.
Robusta.
No, it's an open source tool. It came from New Relic that does the eBPF based monitoring. You did a video on it also.
Yeah, my brain froze now.
Pixie.
Huh? Yeah, Pixie, exactly.
That Pixie is great because Pixie does eBPF based monitoring. It picks up everything. So Pixie is great as well. If you're dealing with the pain of Prometheus, you can think of using Pixie and see if that solves your issues.
But, like you said, you need to have Grafana. That's the part I don't agree. I mean, I do use Grafana, but I don't mind if anybody's using any other different dashboard, if there are any. The one I feel that you cannot not use, that's Prometheus. Format. Not necessarily Prometheus. Simply because everything in Kubernetes that needs data starts with Prometheus and eventually, maybe, if you're very lucky, starts supporting something else. I feel that even if you're using Datadog, you still need Prometheus. It's unavoidable.
I agree. I would say Grafana as well, though, just because every component in Kubernetes, when they release a dashboard, will release a Grafana dashboard. Meaning you should have Grafana. Now, is that the UI that you use always? Maybe not, but it's a great starting point because every project in the Kubernetes landscape has a Grafana dashboard.
Oh, that's true as well. Yeah, you can just import the dashboard and say, I'm done. Or at least kind of like I have a starting point.
Exactly. It gets you to the MVP very quickly.
Okay, let's see. EKS upgrade. What about EKS with Carpenter?
Use Carpenter.
Yes.
Great.
Yes, exactly. I mean, the whatever was the name of the EKS cluster autoscaler or whatever was there before Carpenter was just the most horrifying experience ever.
Yeah. No, Carpenter is great.
Okay, more for you, Scott. I didn't hear you, so you mean the starting point with a tool that is based on CAPI concept is Crossplane. I'm going to put words into your mouth. If you use CAPI, Crossplane is not the starting tool. It just might be where you go afterwards.
Crossplane is the wrapper above Cluster API, which provisions clusters using different infrastructure CAPI providers. Crossplane is just another abstraction above CAPI.
So let me actually clarify that. Because I feel, and this is probably because the project itself did a terrible job. And everybody thinks as everything Crossplane being one indistinguishable blob of things.
Yeah.
The two important things about Crossplane is that there are compositions and there are providers, right? Providers can be AWS, and then you can use those providers. You install those providers, you get AWS CRDs and controllers, and then you can create VPCs and EKS and node group and whatever, right? And there are compositions that allow you to create your own API and orchestrate how Kubernetes resources will be composed. Now, that second part composition composes resources and does not really matter, except in certain situations, whether those resources happen to be also by Crossplane or CAPI or Kubernetes deployments or Helm charts or whatever. It composes resources. So when Scott talks about Crossplane, I'm guessing, correct me if I'm wrong, in this context, he's talking about composition. How do you combine different resources under one CRD?
Exactly. Like one good example of this is like I built a Crossplane provider for Apache Cloud Stack using Upjet for all of the resources in the Terraform provider. There are only two resources I did not include: Kubernetes node pool and Kubernetes cluster. There's a CAPI provider, and I don't believe that anyone should ever create a Kubernetes cluster in Cloud Stack using their managed one, and they should be using the cluster API. And therefore, the Cloud Stack provider of Crossplane simply does not support the Kubernetes resource, nor will APR for that ever be approved by me, because I believe that is an error. Feel free to fork it and do it on your own. It will not be in my provider. Simply for the reason that I do not believe that that is a legitimate and correct way to manage a cluster. There are standards, and we should be following those standards. If you want to use Crossplane, which you should, as a great abstraction builder, use that for an abstraction builder, but Cluster API is the de facto standard for managing clusters, and we should be using Cluster API for that. And Crossplane can wrap Cluster API beautifully.
And also, I mean, and nothing really prevents you from combining, let's say, AWS resources from Crossplane and Cluster API and say, I'm going to use Cluster API to assemble Kubernetes clusters, EKS clusters in this case, but then I will use AWS to assemble, I don't know, RDS, right? Or whatever else you're doing, right? CAPI is concerned only about resources that are directly related to Kubernetes clusters, right? The scope is more narrow, more focused, and better.
Or AWS provider will create the VPC and the subnets and then pass those IDs into Crossplane for it to create the cluster into there. That's completely legitimate. What isn't is to have Crossplane create the EKS cluster using the AWS provider. It should be using the Kubernetes provider calling out to CAPI.
Okay, from Veer, please suggest which is the best place to store any dependencies, Git LFS with Artifactory or direct Artifactory, considering build machine doesn't have internet access, relies on internal GitHub and Artifactory. I mean, I don't use Artifactory myself, but I'm just going to change the question to registry, right? And if you don't have internet access, then you use internal registry. You just need to figure out how you're going to put, without internet access, third-party images and libraries into that registry, right?
Yeah. And in my mind, if you need to take like a file system of all these things, look at OCI artifacts and auras as a way to store the tools in a registry instead of storing stuff necessarily, in Git LFS or things like that.
From Raya Silan, opinion, how would you scale down multiple GKE clusters after work hours? Cron job? I'm excluding the option to convert everything to Keda here, right? Which would eventually scale the cluster.
I gave a talk back at OSS Summit in Vienna last year, where I actually used Keda against Cluster API to scale on times the machine deployment, so the worker nodes, down to 0 during off hours. So that's my preferred way, and that's how I do it. But yeah, if you can't do that, use a cron job on some Linux machine.
Now, I have actually slightly more radical opinion on that one. I will assume that this person talks about not production cluster, right? Because if it's production, probably doesn't matter what your work hours are. So we're talking about development or staging or something like that, right? And I would go as radical and say destroy them and create them again. It's a good exercise to see whether you can actually recreate things and save money at the same time.
And reinstall Octeto into that cluster?
Reinstall Octeto. Yeah, if you're using Octeto. Whatever you're using, yes.
I'm just going off of your video from this week.
Yeah, install Octeto, install Argo CD, install whatever, right? It just kind of, you will at the same time test whether everything you set up for. Because I really disliked situations, and I'm always looking for opportunities to avoid situations where you say, if this goes down, I don't know how to create it without a lot of pain.
You'll learn if you have to do it. Exactly.
Let's see. Another one, Danny, headlamp is good. I heard very good, but I'm with Scott here. I don't use any of those, but I heard it's good. They say.
Headlamp is very good for core Kubernetes resources. Their custom resource support is abysmal.
You see, if I would be using it for real, I would know. What about NetData for monitoring? I haven't used it either. I don't know if you use NetData.
I haven't.
Okay, another one I don't know, but you might. Signos and HyperDX.
Never used either.
Okay, okay, here's another one. Is Rancher a good tool to manage GKE and EKS cluster in a big company? What are your thoughts on it? I can give my thoughts of the Rancher I know from the past, which I don't know whether it's the same now. I don't like management of anything through a UI. And I know that back in the day, Rancher was going towards using some variation of CAPI, but it was still UI based. I don't like that. I like UI for observability. I want to observe the status of something. So I'm not fond of it, or at least as it was a few years ago. I don't know how it's now, and I don't know what you think, Scott. I don't like any of those click, click, click.
So I think that the click, click, click sells really well in a pitch. And in reality, people want infrastructure as code and declarative management. I have a serious issue with the way that Rancher have implemented a cluster API, which does not follow the standards that the rest of the industry follow, and it seems almost like hey, everyone is telling us why aren't we CAPI based? So what can we do what's the minimum we can do to become cluster API based, just to, mark the checkbox instead of actually adopting the cluster API methodology. And that really annoys me. And therefore I have a major issue with Rancher. I think that RKE2 is one of the worst distributions I've ever seen in my life. I really don't like their distribution themselves. If you're talking about open source tools, though, for managing clusters with a UI, there aren't many out there from a commercial perspective. If you're able to pay, things like Spectral Cloud or D2IQ, which is now NKP, that were bought by Nutanix, or Tanzu Mission Control, or things like that are fleet managers, are going to be much better. And my personal favorite is Spectral Cloud, and it manages GKE, EKS, and AKS all through CAPI. That's what you want to go with, not something like Rancher.
Okay, I cannot pronounce this, Scott. Jon recently, I don't know which Jon, published a video about DevPod. What's your opinion on it as a developer? And I'm very glad that the question goes directly to you, Scott. You're mentioning it, so I don't have to say what I think about it. So that we don't fight.
Yes, we can fight because I saw your video, Victor. I'm a big fan of DevPod. I think that there are a lot of use cases for DevPod. And I will agree with what Victor said at the end of his video. If your use case is covered by DevPod, it is the best tool to solve that type of issue. It is a very good tool. It follows an industry standard. By the way, there is another tool that follows dev containers, Victor. It's called GitPod. They moved off of their horrifyingly terrible proprietary YAML format into using dev container JSON. So, yay. We have another tool implementing dev containers now. And IntelliJ have brought that in as well. So there's more and more tools that are supporting dev containers, and DevPod is by far the best way, I think, to run them. I'm a huge fan of DevPod. I do agree with what Victor mentioned, though, which is that the challenge with dev containers is that it's a single container, and it doesn't really deal with, all of the dependencies and things like that. That's where either building a wrapper around it that also deploys dependencies and injects configuration, or my personal favorite is to deploy with DevPod and have the start command be like a tilt up. That actually, so it creates the remote development environment with everything you need, and then deploys using tilt or scaffold into the cluster all of the dependencies that you need. So
okay, so you're talking about deploying those dependencies not inside the DevPod container.
Not inside of the DevPod, in the Kubernetes cluster that it's running.
Oh, I don't know why haven't I thought about that. That's a winning combination, because then you get the tools and you get the real deal as well.
It allows me to not need any dependencies locally except DevPod on my machine. I get a remote development environment in the cluster, and I, simply using tilt or scaffold or Octeto or whatever I want, get all my dependencies deployed, and you can have that as an auto start command when you start the DevPod.
So it would be something like similar to what I did with my brain stopped, with Octeto, but except that your laptop is not your laptop, but it is a dev container.
Correct.
Yes, that makes sense. That makes a lot. Oh, that's a good one, man.
Yep. Yeah, that's, I think, the right way of doing it. Not to say that you did it wrong, but you did it wrong.
Okay, from Bruno, there is so much tooling in CNCF for small companies who want to use Kubernetes like K3s. Sorry about that. What is the go-to for monitoring and managing? I use built-in resources and kubectl. There's so much here. I don't like K3s. I don't see the point in K3s. Huh?
KubeSeal, I think, is sealed secrets from Bitnami.
Is it? Yeah, maybe. KubeSeal. I mean, I know the name, and I cannot now place it.
KubeSeal is the CLI for sealed secrets.
Okay. I mean, if it's a small team using sealed secrets, probably makes
It's
sense.
terrible.
I mean, there are risks.
No. Use SOPs.
Oh, until they get operator, I'm not using it.
There is an operator. It's just not an official one, but it's very good.
Okay. Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah.
Because I checked one like half a year ago, but it forced me to. I had to define the stuff in exact order.
So there's
the
that came out like 3 months ago. That's very good. I'll send you a
then
link.
I haven't. Yeah, then that's cool. Kind of like with operator, that changes my opinion about it completely.
It also
and-
integrates the best GitOps tool called FluxCD.
I know. I Flux is amazing. I love Flux. It's just that I feel that it is going
Argo
down
one.
the. Huh?
Argo 1. It's
Yes,
whether you like it or not.
exactly. That's my main beef with Flux, and it's unfortunate. And especially, actually, I discovered only a month ago. No, actually, in London, I was told, and that was the last kind of drop in the bucket, that Microsoft, which was the only big one that said Flux, is now Argo CD as well, or at least in parallel.
I mean, Flux is still a managed add-on of AKS, so that's interesting. But yeah.
Well, what can you do? Not always, the good ones don't win always. Anyway, monitoring and managing very small team, I guess, small company. I don't know whether you should even use Kubernetes then. Very small company.
Google Cloud Run.
Google Cloud Run. Azure Container Apps. Why not? Vercel.
Azure Container Apps or Google Cloud Run, because both of them have Kubernetes compliant APIs that you can use.
Okay. Oh, this is a trick one. Any LLM solution which monitors Kubernetes risks provides live troubleshooting assistance to human operators. I personally haven't seen reliable LLM that gives me information that actually makes sense. I never saw
I've
it.
never seen a tool here that makes any sense as well. There's HGPT, there's a bunch of tools like that. None of them have been good enough for what I believe is needed to make me do it.
Okay, another one. How can we have multiple isolated Kubernetes environments for development or staging environments where multiple teams can test their stuff without waiting for others to finish their testing? The answer to that question depends. So, first, I'm not sure why do you want isolated Kubernetes environments. Let me bring in back the. So I was saying, Scott. First, I'm not sure whether why do you want isolated Kubernetes environments, except for CRDs and or cluster level resources. But if you do, then that would be vCluster, right?
Yeah,
Just
100% cluster.
There you go. Easy. Tried OrbStack for virtual machines, Kubernetes and Docker for Mac. It does all in 3 clicks max. I haven't used OrbStack, so I don't know really. I don't even.
I
deal
haven't
with
tried
virtual
ObStack,
machines.
and I refuse to use Mac because I, have pride and will not touch anything made by Apple.
I'm not fond of Apple, but I'm not going back to Windows, man. I'm sorry.
Ubuntu still exists. You are more than welcome to use a legitimate operating system.
I give you that. Ubuntu is, or at least when I used it, was amazing. It's just that I'm tired of trying to figure out something that doesn't work. I don't know how it's the situation today. I had probably like 5-6 laptops in the past with Ubuntu, and there was always something not working. You know, one does not go to sleep when you close it. Another one, I need to compile the driver. I don't know how it's today. If I can buy a laptop that is good, so I have 2 requirements. First, easier one. I want a laptop that just kind of comes and works with the operating system. And if that's Ubuntu, that's great. Second, after having a taste of Apple Silicon, I'm still waiting for PC manufacturers to do something similar. You haven't tried it, you don't know what you're missing. I'm talking about hardware now. Forget about being Apple.
That is your mistake for trying it.
Oh, that's fair enough. Fair enough. That's why I'm not sitting in expensive. That's why I never. You know, when there is a Lamborghini or something like that, and somebody says, "Do you want to sit and try it?" I'm not doing that. I cannot afford it. I want to go back to my Kia Rio and still be happy. Is that the type of the comment you had?
That's what having a Mac costs. The Lamborghini.
Actually, Mac is not expensive.
Everything else is.
Everything else is, I mean, base models of stuff now with Apple are good price. Now, if you make a mistake and say, I want more memory or more disk or something like that, you're in a lot of pain. But if you buy a base model,
what if you want to buy a... Hold on, Victor. What if you want to buy a charger?
It's USB-C.
8 times the price of any charger for any other laptop on planet Earth. Oh, you want to buy a keyboard? Great. 55,000 times the price of a standard keyboard that's better. Good.
So I mean, basically they rip you off on upgrades and they rip you off on accessories, and I agree 100%. They're really terrible at that. But base models of things like laptops, they're actually pretty well priced. Okay,
if the base model is enough for you.
Yes, absolutely. If it's not, then don't go there. There is so much tooling being built around Kubernetes. Have you ever thought, like me, that CNCF probably should try bringing existing similar Kubernetes tools to a kind of a merged project? I don't think that will... First of all, I don't want a merged project. Because I don't want to
end up Kubernetes to be smaller, not bigger.
Yes. And if you want the merged project, actually, because things are separated, there is a freedom to choose. And for many people, that freedom is just too complicated, and that's fine. But if it's too complicated, the freedom to choose, then you go for Kubernetes distribution. You don't build it yourself. You get Rancher. You get, I don't know, AKS from Azure with all the plugins installed and so on and so forth, right? Kind of, there is no merged project, but there are merged distributions.
Yes. Use a solution around Kubernetes if it's too complex for you, but please let's not move more things into Kubernetes. We want to move more things out of Kubernetes. We've experienced that already with CPI and CSI. Thank God those are out now. And we need to be moving more and more out of Kubernetes, in my mind, not moving it in.
Yeah, when you say Kubernetes, just for the audience to clarify, and you correct me if I misunderstood, you're talking about Kubernetes itself, core Kubernetes, exactly. And that's what's happening.
Much of things need to be run on Kubernetes or managed by Kubernetes, but the Kubernetes core needs to be as slim and small as humanly possible, with as many extension points as humanly possible, for as many extensions to be able to plug in wherever it makes sense.
I mean, if I go back to Linux that you mentioned earlier, right, that's the same model. when people say Linux, they mean Ubuntu or CentOS, but Linux itself is kernel, right? It's pretty small and not doing much. It's just a base on top of which you can build your own distribution that actually starts making sense. And I will go as far as to say, actually this is safe to say, if you just use Kubernetes core, you can, in the past, it was horrible or insufficient. Now it does not even work. There is no even networking, kind of like nobody uses Kubernetes alone. That's not even possible to do.
Exactly.
Okay, last one. Bruno, based on previous comment, do you feel like Kubernetes is like a marketplace orchestrator? I don't. I feel like Kubernetes is a base platform. I feel that it is a standard that forced everybody to use it, and we now have a much. Everybody thinks that Kubernetes is complicated. I think it's actually, for what it does, relatively simple, because once you figure out how it works, API, then everything starts making sense. Kind of all the hundreds of projects are forced to follow the standard, how you define APIs, how the controllers work, and so on and so forth. It's not a marketplace. It's a base. It's like a kernel.
Kubernetes is the easiest abstraction for the complex solutions that it tries to solve.
I like that one. That's a good definition.
Right? And yes, Kubernetes tries to solve more than almost any tool on planet Earth tries to solve. And therefore, it is one of the most complex tools on planet Earth. And therefore, it may be too much for many companies. But that doesn't mean that it's complex relative to what it solves.
But now you're going against, I feel that you're going against what you said before. Kubernetes, I would rephrase what you said. Kubernetes ecosystem tries to solve whatever it tries. Kubernetes itself, again, does not solve much.
But what I mean by that is Kubernetes needs to be the most agnostic, because Kubernetes is meant to be the base of a platform. Think of it, what's the most complex code base on planet Earth?
I don't know.
Probably the Linux kernel.
Probably.
Because it supports so many CPU architectures, so many types of hardware. Every esoteric device that exists out there, there's a driver that's baked into the kernel. And the reason that it is so complex is because what does the kernel actually give me? I can't use the kernel on its own, but the kernel is that building block that based off of that, Ubuntu, RHEL, Fedora, Linux Mint, whatever distro I have can do what it needs to do. Meaning any base layer has to be extremely complex, not because it itself on its own can do everything, but because its goal is to enable you to be able to do anything.
True. I was referring before, rather I was looking at it more from the user perspective. It's not actually complex alone until you start putting things, but yeah, from the code base, definitely.
Yeah.
Okay, I think that we are way over the time. Thank you everybody for coming. Thank Jon for coming and Scott for staying. See you all next week.
And next week I will have a